Welcome to the Tale of the Tape Boxing Podcast. Coming to you from the fight capital of the world, Las Vegas. Bringing you exclusive interviews with the biggest names in the boxing industry, both in and out of the ring. The Tale of the Tape Boxing Podcast is brought to you by Alvini and Associates Financial Services. Now, here's your host, Amal Shah.
Welcome to the Tale of the Tape Boxing Podcast. I'm your host, Amal Shah. You can follow Tale of the Tape Boxing Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. Both are Tale Tape Boxing. Follow me on Twitter at Amal Shah1. Joining me today is one of the premier boxing promoters in the world, Lou Dibella, and that is how most of you know him, but he is so much more than that. A lawyer, a former TV executive, an actor, a producer, a baseball team owner, two to be exact, and so many other things I probably left out of the equation. You can follow him on Twitter at Lou Dibella. Lou, thank you so much for making the time.
No, it's my pleasure, Amal.
And I'll tell you what, normally I'd get right into it and have some questions, but I'll tell you, in kind of researching you, there were two words that really jumped off the page to me about your personality. And I got to give the writers credit in terms of how they described you. But you seem like a guy to me that is my two favorite words in the English language, relentless and passionate. Those two things seem to embody the success that you've had in this industry. Tell people who don't know you that well a little bit about you, your passion, and then we'll kind of get into your background in terms of how you got to where you are and you've been so successful.
You know, passion's a word that I think a political word that people have used toward me because they like me for the most part, and I'm pretty honest and open with the press generally, and have been for the 30 years of my career in sports. Some people would say I'm out of my fucking mind, probably, and I am emotional. Look, I love what I do. I love boxing, but I also make no bones about the fact that we're the wild, wild west, that we're a dangerous, unforgiving sport, and that the business often stinks. Doesn't mean I don't love it. And I think 30 years in the business and a Hall of Fame career, I've earned the right, like, to shit on my own sport. Whereas when I hear people who don't know anything about boxing or are in sports that have their own issues and problems looking down on us, I get protective. But, you know, about our own little universe, I love boxing. I grew up, Muhammad Ali was my hero. I grew up with boxing as baseball as my favorite sports from the time I was 5 and 6 years old. I mean, I was a fan of Ali's when I was barely able to walk. And, you know, I love the sport I work in. I love both sports I work in primarily. But I realize the issues that both face, and particularly boxing can be so much greater than what it is right now if we can just, solve some of the problems that have been endemic to our sport for generations. And I think that, frankly, the fact that we've been unable to, resolve stuff like all the health and safety issues, like bad judging, corruption. There's been a lot of issues boxing's faced that we've not been able to resolve. However, it's not like the other sports don't have their own problems. So I don't mind being called passionate. I think my passion's helped me get where I am in my career. I think it also has cost me certain opportunities. I probably was a little bit too passionate and emotional for a big corporation like Time Warner, where I was, I was the head of HBO's boxing program for about a decade. But I was never the most political animal on earth. So, it probably didn't serve me very well there. But if I didn't leave HBO and I didn't start my own company, I never would have been in a Rocky movie. I never would have run 2 minor league baseball teams. I never would have, produced documentaries and films. So I've been able to do a breadth of stuff by sort of following my own course. So.
Tremendously impressive background. You touched upon so many things I want to get to, but let's kind of start a little bit about from where your background is. You alluded to the fact that you were with Time Warner, HBO, a subsidiary of Time Warner. For people that don't know, Lou is very highly educated, having attended Tufts for undergrad and then the incredibly prestigious Harvard Law School. After you finished up law school, did you jump straight to HBO or were you in a law firm for a short while? Take us a little bit through your tenure and your track there. And then especially to the point where you left HBO and then really going out on your own. I know you're extremely confident being a Harvard Law graduate, but I would assume there's a sense of trepidation when you're getting into a completely different endeavor.
Oh yeah, look, anything new brings trepidation. Any big change in anybody's life brings pressure and anxiety and stress, even if it's the right move. So, but I have to say that I had some experiences early in my life where I lost some close friends when I was young. I lost my brother after he had a profound skiing accident. Was in a coma for a couple of months, and then he recovered from that. Was hit by a car and committed suicide. So, I had things happen in my life that tended to make me more philosophical, where I haven't really ever. I made a decision I was going to be true to me, even if it didn't necessarily work out in the moment. And I think some of that reputation of being passionate and outspoken or whatever just goes with a conscious decision to give a little bit less of a fuck than many people do. I think I'm a decent person. I think I'm a good human being, an honorable person to do business with. But I am somebody that's not, I don't suffer bullshit very well. And I prefer open, honest, transparent business dealings and open, honest, transparent conversations. To answer your question, I started out, I got out of law school. When I was in law school, I founded the Committee in Sports and Entertainment Law at Harvard Law School, which still exists. And it's like the student organization of people that want to get into sports and entertainment. And I was a founder of that when I was at Harvard Law School I think I founded it in 1983 or 4. And I was a teaching assistant for a sports law course with a professor named Paul Weiler, who wrote a sports law textbook that I'm giving a little acknowledgement in because I helped him work on it. And I was teaching assistant on a course in sports law that he offered with Red Auerbach of the Boston Celtics, who was then retired and as co-professor. So I always knew I wanted to get into the sports world and I wanted to be in the sports and entertainment areas. I got out of law school. I couldn't get a job in sports or entertainment. I had to go to a law firm first, and I went to a big law firm, and I did my 4 years there. I was at a firm called Sullivan and Cromwell, which is a very prestigious firm, and I didn't really enjoy being a lawyer. It wasn't my thing. I wasn't turned on by real estate or corporate deals that I was working on, but I got to work with some very smart people, and I got to hone some skills in terms of negotiation and reading and drafting contracts that have served me in my sports and entertainment stuff. And 1989, I had been from the second I started at the law firm in 86, I was looking to move to a sports and entertainment job as soon as I possibly could. So I had to work really hard, so I didn't have an unlimited amount of time to search, but I always had my eye on the street to what else was out there. And in 1989, the Yankees were looking for a general counsel, a lawyer for the New York Yankees, an in-house lawyer. And I went through a series of interviews with Yankee brass, and I got narrowed down into what was a finalist group of, I think, 3 or 4 candidates. And I was supposed to have an interview with George Steinbrenner. And the interview was scheduled. And literally, I had taken a day off from the law firm. I made an excuse. I had my suit on. My resume was in my pocket. And before I left my apartment, I got a phone call from George Steinbrenner's secretary. And I knew something was wrong because she sounded like shaky on the call, just saying hello, almost like sheepish. And I was like, is there a problem? And she's like, well, sort of. And I said, well, just blurt it out. And she's like, well, the boss thought, he realized you're only 29 years old, you're in your 20s, and he thinks that's a little bit green to be the general counsel of the New York Yankees, and you're just too young for the job in his view, and he asked me to cancel the interview. And she must have heard me exhale with a woeful sigh, and the lady said to me, I don't know if this helps you, but the guy who's getting a job was a finalist for a job as the general counsel for HBO Sports. And as soon as she said HBO Sports, the light in my head went off that said boxing, because, as I said to you, my 2 loves were baseball and boxing. And And I literally had my suit on already. My resume was already in my pocket. This was years before 9/11. This was, a decade before 9/11. So, you could sneak past the security desk. And I literally went to the HBO building, snuck past the security desk, got into the elevator, asked around for people until I found the office of the head lawyer for HBO, the general counsel of all of HBO. And I sat outside his office, tried to chat up his secretary, and beg him to see me. And the guy heard me pleading with his secretary, and he came out of his office and he said, "Well, as like my secretary just told you, I was about to make an offer to somebody, but you're here anyway. Come on in and let's have a conversation. I don't know that it's going to lead to anything, but I'm happy to give you 10 minutes." Well, the 10 minutes turned into almost an hour. And I sat in his office, and I do have a pretty good educational background, so my resume was pretty strong. But what I said to the guy was, and I think he was moved by this, I said, "I don't care who you're interviewing. I know you don't have anybody with a better resume than me. I'm sure you are interviewing people that are just as strong, but you certainly have not interviewed anybody that knows more about boxing than I do. And I'm telling you right now that, let me talk to Seth Abraham, and he'll know how much I know about the sport and how much passion I have about boxing and how much I'm the right person for this job." And then the guy thought about it, and he's like, "Look, what do I have to lose?" He goes, "I'm going to call up to Seth. If Seth will see you, I'm going to send you upstairs." So I went upstairs, met with Seth Abraham. Turns out that his first two loves in terms of sports were baseball and boxing, just like mine. And I told him what happened with the Yankee job, and I spent a couple of hours in his office talking about boxing, talking about baseball. We vibed really well. And that was a Friday afternoon. I went home for the weekend, and I got a call on Monday offering me the job. And that changed my life.
That is one of the most encouraging and one of the most enjoyable stories I've ever heard in terms of perseverance. And, I can remember doing things like that myself when I started out my career. And I always tell people, you've just got to make people tell you no sometimes. And I love the fact that you just wouldn't take no for an answer. And your stick-to-itiveness got you to exactly where you wanted to be. That's really impressive in terms of what you were able to accomplish.
And I think it was also a bit of a turning point for me, because it wasn't like me to be that pushy. Or that, but you know what? I was already at a stage where I wanted to be happy. I wasn't happy being a lawyer. I wanted to get into sports, and obviously, if you're a baseball fan, the job, even though I'm a Met fan, being the general counsel to the New York Yankees is a pretty big job and prestigious one. So I was super excited about that. But when I got this call, when she called me and she said, "Look, maybe you want to call HBO." Look, I'm forever grateful. I don't remember the lady's name that worked for the Yankees, but I got to tell you, I'm forever grateful for that suggestion that she gave me on the phone. And it was clear to me that she felt badly for me. She knew how excited I was. She knew I had the interview scheduled and I was coming in, and I think she felt badly to let me down. But she had the foresight to say, "Hey, on the QT, there is a job open at HBO Sports." And I don't think she even knew that HBO Sports was so boxing centric. But for me, the light went off in my head immediately, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I got to get into the HBO building." And that's what I did that day.
I think you're being extremely humble, but I give you a lot of credit. A lot of people would not have capitalized on that information, which, we talk about all the time in life. Listening is such a vital skill set that gets overlooked. Everybody wants to kind of show their presence by speaking, but the ability to listen is what converted it into a success story for yourself.
Yeah, it did. And I think that my excitement for the opportunity and how much it meant to me, and I think that was evident to John Redpath, who was the name of the guy that was the general counsel of HBO at the time, and to Seth at the time. I think these guys must have gotten on the phone later that day and said, "I'll tell you what, this kid really wants this." Because I was still in my 20s, and I was young and hungry and really, really needed to make a change in my life. And it worked out, and the rest is history. And funny, I talked to Seth Abraham yesterday for a few hours. We caught up when I left HBO. As I'm sure it'll get discussed in the next few minutes, you and I. But I left HBO on some bumpy terms, and Seth and our relationship had gone south a little bit at the end of my tenure at HBO. But he and I are good friends now. We're 20 years removed from me leaving HBO at this point, 19 years removed. And he and I are, you know, I'm forever grateful for him for giving me a life-changing opportunity. And for years and years, he was a great boss. And then, honestly, like, you know, you work at a big company, there's corporate politics. I got too big for my bridges. He allowed me a lot of discretion, in effect, to run the boxing program. And then when you wind up getting that kind of power in a company, you're a young guy, you're making less money, you're rising, politics take over in big corporations. And like I said earlier, I'm not a politician. You know, I'm a sports and entertainment guy, but I'm not a politician.
You are listening to Tail of the Tape Boxing Podcast. My guest currently is Lou Dibella. You can follow him on Twitter at Lou Dibella, Loudibella. Lou, so you mentioned you spent a dozen years at HBO. You have tremendous success. You're an executive there. You're an integral aspect of the success that HBO had in boxing. At that point in time, you're well established in terms of contacts, relationships, and you said the corporate place environment wasn't necessarily for you. You decided to venture out on your own.
Well, you know, look, to be totally, again, it's easy to be open and honest when you don't give a shit. So, like, let's just be open and honest.
Sure.
I wanted to run HBO Sports.
Okay.
I did. I mean, I had years and years of working for Seth. And Seth belongs in the Boxing Hall of Fame, by the way. I mean, I got elected already, and believe me, I'm very thrilled and grateful, even though my induction has been postponed a year. But Seth Abraham belongs in the Boxing Hall of Fame because when boxing left network TV and it was struggling, Seth Abraham was the one that opened up the doors of premium cable and pay TV to boxing, which saved boxing. And also under Seth's watch, boxing pay-per-view was born, and boxing pay-per-view was also another major factor in keeping boxing healthy in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. So, Seth had a lot to do with the success and revitalization of a sport that was rapidly fading. I learned a whole lot working at HBO, and I did a lot for their boxing programming. I started the Boxing After Dark franchise for them. I think I opened the doors for the smaller weight classes. There's a lot of successes I was able to have with the group of people. I worked with a lot of super talented people, and those were really the heydays of HBO boxing. Now, 20 years later, HBO's out of boxing, which breaks my heart. But we had a great run when I was there, and I walked into a meeting that was a annual budget meeting for HBO Sports, and the meeting sort of didn't go as I anticipated. And the guy that was running HBO at the time barked at me, and I thought there was a lack of respect, and also I had been sort of told by the people I was working for that Seth's tenure was going to likely end sometime soon, and that I was going to succeed him. And without telling me, Seth got renewed for a multi-year contract that no one told me about, which was going to make it clear that I had no place to go other than sit in the exact same place I was for a number of years. And at that point in my life, I wasn't really willing to do that. But also, I was really, really disappointed, that an executive above me would be disrespectful for me when I felt like I was doing my job in an incredibly high level. And I was more disappointed that they were less than what I believe transparent and forthcoming with me. And if you're going to make a decision that involves me and it's going to affect my life, and you've made other assurances to me, at least have the decency to communicate with me openly and honestly. I didn't feel like that took place, and to me that was sort of a breach of my relationship with my bosses and with my company. And being a little bit uncontrollable and a little bit too passionate and a little bit not enough of a politician, rather than explaining it as calmly as I am to you right now, I responded with a "go fuck yourself," and I picked up my pile of papers and I stormed out of the room. And then when I got a phone call later to say, "Hey, I know you didn't mean what you said," and let's try to work stuff out. My first reaction was, no, I meant everything I said, including the part where I told you to go fuck yourself. And needless to say, that created an ongoing process that led to me, leaving HBO. I never was fired. We worked out an arrangement, and I left HBO, started my own company, and I had a contract to provide programming to HBO for a number of years. And you know what? Like, I don't blame anybody. What happened was just, corporations are things change rapidly and unexpectedly, and there's a lot of politics, and there are a lot of different people jockeying for different things. And in some ways, I think leaving HBO in 2000, right? I left literally weeks before 9/11, but leaving HBO at that point in time probably was a good thing for me. It probably allowed me, it caused me to look in a lot of different directions. It allowed me to do more of a variety of things, and I don't look back in regret. I just look back and think it was part of the journey.
Right or wrong, I'm sure a lot of people would love to exit their current or previous jobs in the manner and the fashion which you did. Tail of the Tape Boxing Podcast is brought to you by Alvini & Associates. You can find them online at alviniassociates.com for all your financial needs. If you prefer to reach them by phone, do so at 302-836-8490, alviniassociates.com. Lou, you talked about your career that got you to the point where you became a boxing promoter. On a superficial level, I think many people understand what the role of a boxing promoter is. But once you have signed a fighter, once you've deemed that you think this person has the ability to really rise within the ranks, take us through a little bit of what your day is a little bit like, but also more importantly, in terms of what it is that your job entails for the fighter himself.
I've already said boxing has no commissioner. It has no central authority. It very much is, in the sports world, the wild, wild west. UFC has a major advantage of a near monopoly situation. Not a monopoly, legal monopoly, but obviously by far the strongest brand in MMA. But they have a company run by a few people, and those few people are the powers that be in that entire sport. And in boxing, it's every man for himself, and there's no barrier to entry. And traditionally, we have attracted our fair share of rogues and degenerates, and it's not an easy business. We also, by the way, attract a lot of very highly educated, intelligent people. And if you look at Bob Arum was a U.S. attorney, also a Harvard Law School graduate. Al Heyman, who runs the PBC brand in boxing, that does the majority of the boxing on Showtime and the boxing on Fox and FS1, was one of the top music promoters of the last 50 years, and the first mega promoter who was African American, and he's a very smart guy, and a guy that has his business degree from Harvard Business School. So, and Don King, who didn't go to Princeton, he went to prison, was still one of the smartest, most Machiavellian and brilliant negotiators I ever met, who had a way, without any kind of formal education, of taking guys who were heavily educated and wrapping them around his little finger. And Don also had that force of personality and charisma you need to be a boxing promoter. You really can't effectively be a boxing promoter without having a little bit of pizzazz. Part of what you're doing is that P.T. Barnum sort of carnival barker, sell tickets, build up an event kind of thing. And you need to have a certain degree of panache and charisma to function effectively as a boxing promoter. So it's, the world of boxing promotion, a lot of it was, hard business, dollars and cents, being able to do a profit and loss statement and figure out how to make an event profitable. A lot of it was also marketing and promotion and carnival barking. And that's, it's fun, but it's also a highly stressful, high risk business. If you manage if you promote horse racing, or you own horses. The horse doesn't have problems at home. The horse doesn't go to jail. The horse doesn't. The horse doesn't develop a drug problem. You're investing very heavily in a sport that's very different than every other sport, because in boxing, a fighter's whole trajectory, career, and value can turn on a 10 count. One punch that he doesn't see that knocks him out, and the count of 10, and a fighter's whole professional life can change. And that's, if you're the promoter that represents that fighter, and he's the biggest fighter in your group of fighters, and he's the highest paid, that changes the whole prospects of your business for a period of time. And, a Major League Baseball player can have a bad season or two. An NBA player can say the same. You can look at any other pro sport, and you can lose it for a year or two, and then come back and have a great season and sign a new contract. In boxing, the heavyweight champion of the world goes from champion to challenger and contender in a 10-second count.
You're absolutely right. No other sport can you have such a precipitous rise and such a quick drop-off as well. You're so correct on that. You mentioned baseball. You've mentioned it and referenced it several times. For people that don't know, you own a team in Richmond, the Flying Squirrels, who are an affiliate of the San Francisco Giants. In Montgomery, Alabama, you own a team that's an affiliate for the Tampa Bay Rays. Both of them are AA teams. I understand you're probably the only person who's a boxing promoter with World Series rings. Tell me, how did that come about, your involvement in minor league baseball? And that's got to be a tremendous thrill for you as well, because that's also another passion of yours.
Well, look, when I worked out my severance package with HBO, I got a few bucks out of that package, not insanity, but a few bucks out of that package. And I was able to invest in, at the time, my friend Chuck Greenberg, who later went on to be an owner of the Texas Rangers. Now he's back to owning several minor league teams. But Chuck called me and he said, I know how much you love baseball. I'm about to raise some money and buy a minor league team. And he bought the Altoona Curve, which was an affiliate of the Pittsburgh Pirates in Altoona, Pennsylvania. And I was the first person to sign on as an investor. And what I said to Chuck is, Chuck, I'll be your first investor, but I want to see everything that you're doing. I want to be copied on everything, because I want to learn the business, and then maybe later I can raise the money among people I know or friends or whatever, and get involved in buying a team. I mean, I didn't have the kind of bread that I could go in and buy a minor league team myself, because these things cost tens of millions of dollars potentially, so in some cases. So, but I invested in the Altoona Curve. I learned a little bit about the minor league baseball business, and then I bought a team in Norwich, Connecticut, that after a number of years of operating in deep debt, we were able to move to Richmond, Virginia, which was like moving from the outhouse to the penthouse, because Richmond is an incredibly great little growing city. It's right on that north-south border. It's a southern city, but about an hour away from DC, and it's just a foodie city and tremendous culture and great suburbs and a great downtown area. And I really went from being a team in an industrial park in Connecticut to being the biggest sports game in town, in other than college basketball, in Richmond. So, that journey in minor league baseball has worked out really well for me. And then I had so much success in Richmond, and I had a lot of people working for me that needed to advance, and I had a lot of people that deserved bigger opportunity. And I raised some money and bought another team in Montgomery. And I viewed Montgomery similarly to Richmond. Like, Richmond has grown exponentially in the last 11, 12 years. The city's really boomed. And Montgomery's just beginning its boom. And a lot of those deep southern cities are starting to attract younger people who are getting out of college, and instead of moving to New York or Chicago or LA, are coming to emerging cities in the South. And you're seeing, and Montgomery now has the Equal Justice Initiative is located there. That guy Brian Stevenson, they did a movie about on HBO, and he wrote a book. He was a classmate of mine in law school. The National Civil Rights Museum is now in Montgomery. The memorial to victims of lynching the National Memorial is now in Montgomery, and Montgomery just elected its first African American mayor, Steve Reed, and the city is really starting to rise, and it's a great time to have a baseball team in Montgomery. If minor league baseball can get through the problems it's having with Manfred and the major leagues right now, and hopefully we'll be able to.
You mentioned it. For people that are unfamiliar with it, Major League Baseball is talking about contracting some of the minor league teams. And I'm not saying this because you're on with me right now here. I have a lot of friends that have played professional baseball, and we talk about it all the time. I think it'd be a huge mistake, not only for players.
Well, I got to tell you, I think we're losing the battle on contraction. I think they are going to contract 40-plus teams. And I get it a little bit. There are teams that are inconvenient for travel. There are teams that are in stadiums that are not adequate, but that's not. There are 42 teams there, 42 little cities and towns with blue-collar people and working-class people where the minor leagues are their introduction to professional baseball, and the minor leagues are a huge fabric of these cities, and it's a shame. And to me, it's a stain on Major League Baseball and a stain on the people running it that this was done in the manner it was done. I think they've taken advantage of the pandemic to get leverage, but it looks like there was going to be a contraction, but it goes beyond the contraction. I think they're really looking to change the whole system of minor league baseball, and I think that's a shame. And that's probably for another one of these podcasts. But I got to tell you that it's really disappointing to me because baseball was my safe place.
Yeah.
Believe me, boxing's not a safe. I love boxing, but it ain't a safe place. And baseball was sort of my safe place until recently. And now I realize baseball is just another business.
But, it's unfortunate you mentioned that. I look at it, and we can get into that down the line at some point in time, but I'm with you. I think baseball is missing out on an opportunity. I went to school in Columbus, Ohio, and so many people are Yankee fans there because the Columbus Clippers were there, and you see those players that come through the system, and you get familiar with them. But unfortunately, again, that's a story for another time. But you referenced something. You're not necessarily a big fan of Rob Manfred. Boxing does not have a commissioner. Boxing needs some sort of uniformity to really take advantage of some of the talent they have in this sport. I thought boxing, give UFC credit. They got out in front, and give Dana White and their organization credit. They set up some events. I thought this was really an opportunity for boxing to get back in the mainstream. And to me, when I look at it, Lou, I think boxing is the best TV sport because we know a fight's going to be less than 1 hour.
Just interject for 1 second before you finish your question. Going back to Manfred, I got to be honest also, I don't think necessarily minor league baseball handled all these difficulties in a perfect way either. I just think when you have minor league baseball gets to the fabric of raising kids and families in small towns and cities, it's part of what makes baseball so great. Baseball being the national pastime, like the opening of the baseball season always sort of signified the beginning of spring. And I think if you go, even though football, the NFL, and NBA, and whatever may have, in terms of popularity, in some people's minds, surpassed baseball, most people's association with their first sporting event relates to going to a baseball game with their parents or relatives. And baseball's such a big part of the fabric of our country, and so is minor league baseball. Minor league baseball, and we're talking about over 100 years of local teams in little cities and towns all over this country. And I just wish that Manfred and the other billionaire owners in baseball, who I get it. Like, everybody's in business to make money. That I get that, but do an evaluation of whether in the long run these teams and the existence of minor league baseball makes Major League Baseball stronger or weaker. And I would argue really strongly that it makes baseball stronger. It introduces people who are not regionally or geographically or economically close to Major League Baseball to be able to get a baseball experience, get introduced to professional baseball. And that's where so many baseball fans develop their love for baseball in minor league cities. And I would just really wish that there would be more of an effort to do things in a way that's more collegial and friendly and decent instead of waving the iron fist. But I'm sorry I interrupted your question.
No, you're fine. I loved your statement, though, that you made in terms of why minor league baseball is so important in so many different areas. And I thought you touched upon it a few minutes ago with Montgomery. No professional sports there. We know how big Alabama and Auburn are in college football. And, of course, college basketball is prominent there as well. But in the springtime, summertime, the Atlanta Braves are too far and maybe economically out of reach for a lot of people. But when you have a minor league team there, it attracts people. And I love the assessment you just gave on a variety of topics there with minor league baseball. I think you hit the nail perfectly on the head as to why it's so prominent and can be so effective and efficient in so many of these smaller towns. But I want to get back to the boxing side of it in terms of, as someone who's been in the fight game for a long time with HBO and then out on your own as a promoter who's had tremendous success. You've got a ton of fighters who have had great success in the ring. But when you look at it from a business perspective, but also from a fan's perspective, because you are a fan as well, what are some of the areas that this sport can improve? Because the one selling point that I always see with boxing that I think they missed the boat on a little bit is I understand pay-per-view and you need the gate to generate the revenue, but I think it's such a great made-for-TV sport. Boom, you can take a 1-minute commercial, you're right back. The sport we know is going to last 36 minutes plus the 11 minutes of you've got the the breaks in between the rounds. It's the perfect TV sport in my opinion.
Yeah, well, look. Here's some of the things I think we need to look at and do for our sport. And the unfortunate part is I testified in front of Congress in the 90s, literally 25 years ago, and a lot of the things I'm going to tell you right now, I said 25 years ago and nothing has changed, right? But there's no excuse for not having uniform health and safety standards across all 50 states, including the necessity of a initial CAT scan when a fighter turns professional, and then regular CAT scans when there's a knockdown, a knockout, or at regular intervals in their career across all 50 states. It's barbaric that in many states all you need is an AIDS test and an eye test, and you could have neurological damage out the wazoo and still be licensed. It's not okay. It's not okay to watch a fight that I could have 3 6-year-old girls watching and ask the 3 girls who won the fight and get a more honest answer that you get from 3 professional boxing judges who are involved in a system that is rigged. Because the system of judging and the system of governance of the ratings organizations are very political. And judging should be out of the hands of ratings organizations. Yes, ratings organizations should be able to put their 2 cents in and comment on a particular judge or judges that they believe are not competent. But we shouldn't have judges incented to support certain fighters because of their allegiances to certain ratings organizations. So the system of judging is messed up. And there were referees, you've watched enough fights to know this. There are referees who are brilliant at what they do. There are other referees that don't deserve to be in a ring. And there's no checks and balances. And boxing is state, it's regulated state by state, but it's totally politicized. So, the boxing commission will change when the political party changes in the state. And often you have political hacks being put in charge of state athletic commissions that have no fucking clue what they're doing. So, there's a lot of problems we have as a sport and an industry, and a lot of them are avoidable, but we're not fixing them. And here's the other thing. Networks and streaming services. Use your fucking brain, because exclusive deals with one promoter, that's not going to allow the biggest and best fights to happen. In recent years, more money's been spent in the domestic U.S. on boxing than has been spent in generations, but the quality of the fights hasn't gotten better, and the results haven't gotten better. The pay-per-view numbers aren't higher. The ratings aren't better. There's been a bubble of money because there were new players coming into the industry. Now that bubble is going to end because 1, it was not sustainable to begin with, and 2, we're about to enter into a worldwide recession, and we're still in the midst of a pandemic. So there's going to be an adjustment, but these exclusive deals don't serve the purpose of making the biggest and best fights. And look, how many real boxing stars are? There's a reason right now everybody's talking about 53-year-old Mike Tyson working out and Evander Holyfield being in a gym, because a lot of these guys making millions of dollars who call themselves boxing stars, they're not really boxing stars. They're just being overpaid. Yeah, they might be good fighters, but how many fighters really bring a lot of money to the dance? I mean, Canelo Alvarez is a star. Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder and AJ, yeah, they're stars, but there are an awful lot of people that we call boxing stars that could walk down Times Square in the middle of the afternoon and not be recognized. And you know, you can create really good boxing product by matching two evenly matched fighters and letting them go at it. And by the way, if a fighter's not entertaining to the public, I don't care how good he is, if it's not fun to watch him, then it's reasonable not to pay him a lot of money. And you know, I think that we are a subset of the entertainment industry, and we need to entertain people. And I think one thing positive that could come out of this pandemic is there are an awful lot of fighters right now that are really hungry, literally. And they'll get in the ring and they'll fight a 50-50 fight as long as they're just paid fairly. And I'm not talking about overpaid. I'm talking about paid fairly. So I think we got to get back to addressing some of the issues we have as an industry. That's going to take a little bit of time, because right now we got to just figure out how to get back on our feet coming out of this pandemic. But also, we have to make better fights. We have to make competitive matchups. And when we get back to some semblance of normalcy, the big fights have to be made. You can't. There's no reason why a major fight should. Nothing gets bigger by percolating for 3 or 4 years. People just get tired of waiting. You know, the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight would have been better and bigger had it happened earlier than waiting 7 years for it. And you know, right now, I think we need to, when we get back to some greater degree of regularity, we need to take these exclusive deals and start again. Where I mean, networks and streaming services, if you're exclusive to one, you're doing business. Right now, there's like 3 separate avenues. There's the PBC, Premier Boxing Champion Avenue with Showtime and Fox and FS1, the DAZN Avenue, and DAZN obviously has business issues it has to deal with right now, and the ESPN Avenue. But these 3 avenues, it's somewhat difficult to cross the avenues. And you're not seeing the biggest and best fights happening regularly enough.
You know, Lou, first of all, I can't thank you enough for the time. And you hit upon so many great topics that boxing really needs to address. Unfortunately, these are the same topics we've been talking about, as you alluded to, when you testified in front of Congress. Hopefully there will be some changes in the future. But right now, don't see it necessarily on the horizon. But again, want to thank you so much for the time. Hope you and your family and friends and everyone stay safe. And thank you for making time. You can follow Lou on Twitter at Lou Dibella. Lou, thank you very much.
Right, my pleasure. Thank you.
Want to thank Lou Dibella for coming on today on Tail the Tape Boxing Podcast. It's been brought to you by Alvini Associates. You can find them online at alviniassociates.com for all your financial needs. If you want to contact them by phone, feel free to do so at 302-836-8490. alviniassociates.com, ALVINI. Check them out for all your financial services. I'm your host, Amal Shah, for Tail the Tape Boxing Podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at Tail Tape Boxing, on Instagram at Tail Tape Boxing. This has been a Mike Leonardi production.